have it because the federal law forbids it, basically. But in the state constitution of Hessen, the state in that Frankfurt, it was still an article saying that a death penalty was feasible. And very fitting for a financial center like Frankfurt. One of the reasons why you could get the death penalty was delay of bankruptcy. Right? So that's how serious they took it. But the referendum went through and it's abolished that. The impending insolvency part is a little bit difficult because, like, can you really foresee it? Like, or there may be, like, personally, probably, if you run a company, you have some hope that the situation is fixed. Right, and if you file for bankruptcy too early, you might make things actually worse, right? Because then everyone knows, your suppliers, your customers, that you're in trouble, and that may reduce or may create additional problems because it reduces business that people are doing. Right, so the law is at this point actually not really precise in saying this is a concrete condition, so it's a little bit fluffy, right? They say 3 to 6 months, right? So you have some flexibility around arguing, right? But it needs to be foreseeable kind of within the near future that you're not able to make payments. There is a third criteria when you might file for bankruptcy, and that is the so-called over-indebtedness, and that's actually related to the balance sheet of the company. We just quickly draw a stylized balance sheet again here. So on the left-hand side, we have just assets, and maybe let's just put debt and equity on the right-hand side. So when does over-indebtedness occur? Over-indebtedness occurs if the book value of your assets drops below the book value of debt. Right? So on the left-hand side is everything you own, say machines, plants, projects, factories, and so on. If the value of that, for whatever reason, drops below the liability you have to your debt holders, then you have to file for bankruptcy immediately. And this is a little bit of a weird situation because remember, in the balance sheet, the left-hand side has to be equal to the right-hand side. Right? But if the assets value drops below the value of debt, how does that work out? Right? So the consequence is that the equity position actually becomes negative. Right? And this is something that can only occur in accounting. Right? From a financial perspective, it doesn't make sense. Have you ever seen a negative share price somewhere? Right? Doesn't make sense. Right? So that's where they break a little bit financial theory. But in book values, it can happen. The reason for this, why it doesn't make sense in finance, is limited liability. We'll get to this point in a second. So if you're a stock company or an incorporated company, you lose everything that you have put into the company, but you're not forced to put in additional money, right? So that would be kind of a negative, represented by negative equity. You're forced to put something in. If you have unlimited liability, that means that your personal wealth is affected, then you could consider that as negative equity, right? But for corporations with limited liability, the equity logically should never have a negative value. Right? And we come back to this in the next chapter. Actually, it would allow for an arbitrage opportunity. So these are the three reasons when you have to file for bankruptcy. And for over-indebtedness, it actually doesn't matter when the debt is due. It could be like in 10 years due, so you're not in any financial trouble. You still have enough cash. You can still make your payments for the next 10 years. It doesn't matter. As soon as the book value of the asset drops, maybe like as an example, that could be an energy company that operated some nuclear power plants, and then Germany exited nuclear power generation. So suddenly your assets become much less worth, and you would have to depreciate them immediately. Right? So 3 reasons why you have to file for bankruptcy, and it's basically similar across most countries. Probably details of the code might vary a little bit, but you have these kind of laws everywhere. Now, what then happens is that you have to go to court, in Germany, the Amtsgericht, and file for bankruptcy. It's like a formal procedure, and then the court is determining a so-called trustee, or in German we would say Insolvenzverwalter, so someone who is basically then in charge of the company. So I think there might be some variations across different countries. Like in the US, there's the option that the actual management can stay in the company. But I think in Germany, they have to be replaced by this trustee in any case. So there comes in someone independent who takes over the management, and they can decide basically what to do with the company. So they look at what assets do we have? Can we sell them? How much money can we generate? Or can we maybe restructure our capital structure? So the first thing that would try would be reorganization. Right? So they would try to kind of find a solution out of the problem by renegotiating, for example, with debt holders. You could maybe ask the debt holders to give up 50% of their debt, right? Because in bankruptcy they might lose everything, and if they just give up 50%, there might be a chance that they get at least something in the future. So that might be a deal that you could propose. So just renegotiate contracts, you can sell part of the business, you can look for a business angel and so on. That's the first thing that they usually try. If that's not feasible and not really any chance of success for that, you will liquidate. Liquidate means you sell off everything that you have. And then basically the money that you have generated is distributed to the claim holders of the company. And it's basically very important in which order the money is distributed. That's the so-called seniority order. So you can really picture that as the queue forming in front of the building of the company. The people first in line, they will get their money. And then if you're rather at the end of the line, you have to see whether there's something left after everyone else in front of you got their money back. Right? So in the seniority order, of course, you would like to stand very much in front. So this is the most senior claim, and the ones at the end, they're called junior. And then, I already mentioned the two different cases that can happen. There's limited liability, and unlimited liability would be the opposite. Limited liability means that the debt holders of the company can only basically seize the assets from the company, from within the company, but not the private wealth of the owners of the company. So as an example, Tesla is owned by Elon Musk. If Tesla goes bankrupt, people could get everything that's in the corporation, but they could not get anything back from Elon Musk himself. Right? So everything that he got out of the company, like dividends or the shares that he sold, that's his private wealth, and you can't touch it. Right? That's what limited liability is. So all the stock companies have limited liability, and then there are the private limited companies. In English, we would abbreviate that with PLC. And in Germany, we have the GmbH, which literally means company with limited liability, right? Gesellschaft mit beschränkter Haftung. So these are the two ones that have limited liability, and then on the opposite end, the single entrepreneurs and partnerships, private partnerships, they have unlimited liability. That means you could basically take away the house of the owner, kind of sell it, and then use that to pay the yeah, I forgot to mention the note here, what the chapters here mean. So that's a reference to the Bankruptcy Code of the United States. So sometimes you read this in the media. So say a company is in Chapter 11, right? That means that, okay, they filed for bankruptcy and they're reorganizing at the moment. In the US, this is actually much more common because you can actually, there's actually another reason why you can actually file for bankruptcy strategically. Airlines have done that in the past in the US quite often. So they just basically say, oh, we're in trouble, we need to file for bankruptcy. The reason why they're doing is because all the contracts they have with the labor unions will be eliminated in that moment, and they can renegotiate them. Right? So if you ever ask yourself the question why pilots in the US are not earning as much as the Lufthansa pilots, it's because of that. The company went bankrupt 5 times and renegotiated down the salary. There is this example of this pilot who landed in the plane on the Hudson River. I think there's a movie about it. I think he earned like $45,000 a year, which is pretty low for someone specialized and trained. And Lufthansa pilots earn like 3 times as much at least.